The wind howled across the Kansas plains, slicing through Nora Bennett's threadbare coat as she stumbled along the dirt road. Behind her, the farmhouse lights flickered like the last pulse of a dying heart. Her father's shout still echoed, "Don't you dare come back here!" And the slam of the door felt like the crack of a rifle. The carpetbag in her trembling hands was all she owned. Snow began to fall, thin and sharp as glass, clinging to her lashes. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, but she kept walking, drawn toward the distant whistle of a train she could barely see. She didn't know where it led, only that it was away. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The night was cruelly silent after the storm of voices inside that farmhouse. Nora's parents had made their verdict as if reading a sentence aloud in church. "You're not staying here, Nora. We're done." Her father's eyes, once gentle, had hardened into stone. Her mother stood behind him, arms crossed, mouth a thin, tight line. They didn't even look at her, only through her, as though she were already gone. "Thomas is dead," Nora had whispered, her voice cracking. "I have nowhere else to go." "That's not our fault," her mother replied sharply. "You brought shame to this family. People say you worked him to death. Say your weight broke his back." The words struck harder than the cold wind outside. Nora had felt her knees weaken. "He died of fever," she tried to say, but no one listened. Her father shoved a ticket into her hands. "There's a train leaving for the Wyoming territory. It's for mail-order brides. You'll find work there, maybe a kitchen that'll take you. But you are not staying here." Then came the sound, the one she'd never forget, the heavy wooden door slamming shut behind her. By the time she reached the small town station, dawn had begun to creep over the horizon, pale and unforgiving. The air smelled of soot, iron, and loneliness. 3 young women stood near the platform, their laughter floating in the freezing air like ribbons. Their dresses were bright, scarlet, cornflower blue, butter yellow, and their faces glowed with the thrill of new beginnings. Nora clutched her carpetbag tighter. She could feel their eyes slide toward her. Then the whispers started. "Who's that? She doesn't look like one of us. Maybe she's going as baggage." A sharp laugh, another. Her cheeks burned, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than defense. The train whistle shrieked, long and mournful, and the station master shouted, "All brides boarding for Silver Creek, Wyoming territory." The crowd surged forward. Nora followed quietly, trying to blend in. Then a man's voice rang out from behind the crowd, loud enough to slice through the morning air. "Hold on! Who let her on that train? She'll sink the whole thing before it leaves the station." Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel. Nora froze. The conductor frowned, looking her up and down, but said nothing. Her hands shook as she climbed aboard. She found a seat in the last car, next to the window where no one would have to look at her. The laughter still echoed in her ears as the train lurched forward. The world outside the window blurred into shades of gold and gray. Fields, fences, endless sky. Each mile felt like a layer of her old life being peeled away. But beneath the numbness, a small, fierce spark still lived inside her. "I will not disappear." Hours later, the train slowed as it reached Silver Creek, a rough frontier town framed by dusty hills and endless plains. Men in wide-brimmed hats lined the platform, boots muddy, eyes bright with expectation. The brides stepped off first, all smiles and perfumed curls, greeted with tipping hats and eager handshakes. Then came Nora. The chatter quieted. Someone muttered, "She's not on the list." Another voice snorted, "Guess no one ordered that one." She opened her mouth to explain, "I'm not a bride, I'm just—" But the words died from somewhere near the edge of the platform. A woman's voice rose, dripping with laughter. "Look at her! Too wide to wed!" The phrase spread like wildfire. Too wide to wed, too wide to wed. Men chuckled. Women smirked. Even the station master looked away, embarrassed for her. Nora took a step back toward the train. Maybe she could ride to the next town, find work elsewhere, anywhere. Her throat tightened, and then two small voices cut through the noise. "We want this one, Daddy." The crowd turned. Two little girls, twins, no more than 6, stood at the edge of the platform in matching blue dresses and worn brown boots. Their hair, the color of prairie wheat, bounced as they ran straight to Nora. "She looks like the mama in our storybook," said the first, eyes wide and certain. "Please, Daddy." The second pleaded, gripping Nora's skirt. "We want her." The air went still. From behind them, a tall figure stepped forward. A cowboy, broad-shouldered and quiet, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. Dust clung to his boots, the kind of dust that never really leaves a man who's worked the land too long. He stopped in front of Nora. His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable, not cruel, but searching. "You need a place to stay?" His voice was low, rough like gravel. Nora's mouth opened, but no sound came. I was going to—" "Simple question," he interrupted. "You need a place or not?" She swallowed hard. "Yes." He nodded once. "Then you'll come with us?" The station master gawked. "Ethan, sir, you can't just—" But the cowboy, Ethan Cole, didn't look back. "My girls made their choice." The twins giggled, pulling on Nora's hands as if the matter were already settled. Behind them, whispers erupted again. "He's lost his mind. She'll eat him out of house and home. Poor man's desperate." Nora's legs trembled, but she followed. The cowboy's stride was long, sure he didn't speak again as he led them toward the waiting wagon. The wheels creaked as they rolled away from the station, leaving behind the laughter, the stares, and the only life Nora had ever known. The prairie stretched ahead, endless, wild, and quiet. The girls sat on either side of her, chattering about chickens and horses, about their ranch called Red River. Nora listened, her hands folded in her lap, heart still hammering. She glanced at Ethan's back, broad, motionless, a wall between her and the world. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of fire and dust. For the first time in her life, Nora realized she wasn't running away anymore. She was being led somewhere. She just didn't know where or why, but she would soon find out. Because in Red River Ranch, destiny was already waiting. The wagon rattled over the ruts as Ethan steered away from the station. The twins pressed close to Nora like small, determined anchors. Silver Creek unfurled ahead in a weathered line. Church spire, livery, feed store, the squat square of the jailhouse, and Clara Holt's general store with its bright red sign and squeaky swinging door. The sky, that endless Wyoming sky, hung pale and hard as bone dust rose in soft puffs with every turn of the wheels, settling on boots and hems and the brittle nerves of a woman who had nowhere left to go. Nora kept her hands folded tight in her lap, as if they might betray her by shaking. She could feel the twins watching her in delighted secrecy, like they'd discovered a star fallen into their wagon, and she tried to breathe evenly, to keep her voice from fracturing if either of them asked her anything at all. "Daddy," May said, the tiny apostrophe of a dimple flashing as she turned. "Can we stop for licorice? Miss Clara has the good kind." Not today, Ethan said. His tone was even, unruffled, as if guiding two small hurricanes, and a stranger was a task he'd done every afternoon of his life. June's fist tightened around Nora's sleeve. "Maybe Miss Clara will give us just one," she whispered, conspiratorial and hopeful, and before Ethan could answer, the wagon slowed directly in front of the store. Clara Holt stood in the doorway, a lace collar neat against her throat, the polished certainty of someone who knew exactly where every rumor was kept and how to ladle it out. She smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes, and lifted a hand like a tiny flag of surrender. "Morning, Ethan." Her gaze slid to Nora with the quickness of a blade. "I see you've picked up company." "Girls," Ethan said, drawing the horses to a halt. "Inside for 2 sticks each, no more." The twins' cheers defeated whatever command he'd hoped to maintain. They tumbled off the wagon, dragging Nora by the hand as though nervousness could be outrun. For a second, Nora thought about pleading to stay outside, to keep out of sight behind the safety of wood and wheel, but May's small fingers were insistent, and June's tilted face was so glowing with pride that refusal felt like breaking glass. Inside, the store smelled of flour, coffee, saddle soap, and the faint metallic breath of penny nails. Barrels lined the wall, sacks of feed stacked like small brown hills, and a glass case displayed candies in soldier-straight rows. The few customers turned when the bell above the door clanged. 2 looked back quickly, 1 didn't bother. Clara leaned her elbows on the counter as the twins pressed their noses against the glass. "Licorice, Miss Clara," May announced. 2 for me, 2 for Junie, and, She cut her eyes to Nora, smiled. "1 for our friend." Clara's mouth flickered. "Your friend." Nora tried to recall the script for making herself small. Lower the eyes, speak softly, apologize for existing. The words were there, remnants of an old reflex, but the twins' expectation pulled another instinct to the surface, a braver one she scarcely recognized. "1 will be plenty," she said. Clara's gaze took her in. The breadth of her shoulders, the stitched weariness of her dress, the careful braid pinned at the nape of her neck. "We keep a list of brides for the menfolk," Clara said, tone bright as a dropped thimble. "I didn't see your name." "I'm not a bride," Nora said, and let the sentence sit, unashamed. "Yet," Clara replied, the words sugared and sharp. "Out here, everyone becomes something they weren't when they arrived." Deputy Harris pushed through the door then, hat tipped back, his badge dull in the morning light. He took the scene in with a quick sweep, the twins, the stranger, Clara's set jaw, and nodded once to Nora. "Ma'am?" Nora inclined her head, the deputy's voice held no censure, and that small absence of judgment felt extravagant. Ethan entered, boots whispering sawdust. He stood a respectful distance from the counter, his presence at once quiet and filling the room. "Clara," he said, "sack of flour, coffee, salt, and licorice for the girls?" Clara's hand hovered above the candy tongs. "You mean, for the 3 of them?" "For the girls," Ethan said, and his eyes, calm, unreadable, flicked to Nora for a heartbeat. "She'll take tea." The smallest smile rose at the corner of Deputy Harris's mouth. He turned to a nail bin and pretended to be busy. Clara snapped the tongs shut on 2 black sticks, wrapped them in waxed paper with a tidy twist, and placed the packet on the counter as if it were a deed. Nora realized only after they left what had happened. Ethan had given her a shield without insulting her with charity. Tea, not candy, something a woman would choose for herself, not a treat handed to a child to hush her back on the wagon. May broke her licorice lengthwise and pressed half into Nora's palm. June did the same. "You can't just have tea," June said, with the sincerity of the devout "there are rules." "Is that so?" Ethan asked. "Yes," May replied. "Mama rules." The word hung. Nora felt it settle across her shoulders like a shawl left behind in a church pew. Warm, dangerous, undeserved, and heavy with history. She closed her fingers around the small, sticky sweets and pretended to be examining the sky. When they left the last hitching post of town, the road stretched unbroken. Grasses bleached into a soft gold that shifted with the breeze. Meadowlarks flicked from fence post to fence post, like notes in a simple hymn. The Red River Ranch came into view by its silhouette first. The long-backed barn leaning a little to one side like an old man in need of a stronger cane. The squared shoulders of the house. The windmill ticking with the patience of a clock that no longer keeps time, only motion. Ethan reined in near the porch. "Down you get," he said, and the twins dropped like apples from a near tree, landing with dusty squeals and immediate purpose. "We'll show Nora the chickens." "We'll show her the mean one," June added with the relish of a child who enjoys a contained danger. Nora set her carpetbag on the porch. The boards flexed beneath her steps, dry and talkative. Inside smelled like what she had smelled her whole life. Men who work. The corners they are too tired to see. The chores that accumulate in grief's blind spot. A shirt draped over a chair. A coffee cup with a ring the color of old wheat. A basin that remembered the last set of hands that had washed up and gone to bed, everything clean enough to stave off shame. Not enough to invite company. Ethan paused in the doorway, hat in hand. "You can have the second room down the hall," he said. "Door sticks, shoulder it." He waited a second more, as if searching for a word that would not be a promise and not a dismissal. "We eat at 6. "I can cook," Nora said. She hadn't meant to. It leapt from her like a frightened thing, and once it was in the air, she could not call it back. His gaze flicked. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "We have salt pork and beans, flour, 2 eggs if the hens weren't feeling contrary this morning." "I'll see what I can do," she answered. He nodded once and left, the screen door creaking shut behind him like a sigh. Nora stood alone in the kitchen and placed her palms on the table. The wood was nicked and scored. A ledger of meals and arguments and small, ordinary mercies. She filled the basin from a bucket, rolled up her sleeves, and lost herself the way she always had, in the quiet arithmetic of work. Scrape, rinse. Stack. Wipe. The stove responded to coaxing. A blue flame winked, then steadied. She found an old apron hanging from a nail and tied it on, and the girls burst in from the yard, chins bright with dust, and leaned their elbows on the table like foremen. "We can help," May declared. "We can be in the way," June corrected with pride. "You can wash carrots," Nora said, which was both a job and an invitation. Within minutes, the room filled with the sound of water and the thin, bell-like laughter of children congratulating themselves on not drowning a vegetable. By the time Ethan returned from the barn, the kitchen had rearranged itself into a kind of hope. Biscuits waited in tidy rows like patient travelers. The salt pork had surrendered its sting to a little molasses and vinegar. The beans had accepted their lot and begun to soften. He stopped in the doorway, eyes moving over what had changed and what remained. He did not say thank you. Men like Ethan rarely spent words where a nod would do. But he removed his hat, placed it carefully on the peg, and washed his hands without needing to be told. And that, too, was a language Nora understood. They ate with the brisk gratitude of people who have earned their hunger. The twins narrated the day in paragraphs Ethan contributed with the occasional, the rare, "that's so," and once, astonishingly, a short story about a calf that believed itself a windmill for 3 days, owing to an unfortunate entanglement with a weather vane. Nora laughed, unabashed. The girls laughed because she did. Ethan did not precisely. His mouth made a shape like a man remembering how. For the first time, Nora saw the outline of a past tenderness in him, something softened by sunlight and small hands. After supper, she stood to clear the plates, and he rose at the same time. They reached for the same cup for a heartbeat their fingers grazed. Heat darted up her arm like a startled animal. Ethan withdrew first, as if the touch had told him a secret he wasn't prepared to keep. "I'll take the girls to wash," he said, voice a little rough. "I'll finish here," she replied. When the house settled, the windmill's ticking returned to the evening like a patient insistence. Nora stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea, the promise Clara hadn't intended to keep for her, and let the prairie's breath cool her face. The horizon glowed in a thin line, the kind of light that makes a life feel larger than the sum of its days. Deputy Harris's horse clopped into the yard, easy as a neighbor. He tipped his hat, remained in the saddle. "Evening, ma'am." "Ethan." Ethan came from the side yard, wiping his hands on a rag. "Deputy." "Pastor Green's called a meeting after services on Sunday," Harris said, eyes flicking to Nora with apologies he didn't phrase. "Says the town'll want to clarity." Ethan's jaw worked once, a muscle jumping like a misfired spark. Town can want. Harris glanced at Nora again. "Didn't say I agreed. Just thought you should know before it ambushes you in a pew." "Thank you," Nora said, surprised that her voice arrived steady. She knew the cadence of this story, the counsel of the righteous, the woman in the dock. But something in Ethan's stillness, its gravity, not its threat, told her that the usual ending might not hold here. When the deputy rode off, dusk settled more fully. The twins appeared in the doorway in clean nightgowns, hair damp, eyes bright. "Story?" May asked. June's fingers were already knitting together in anticipation. Ethan hesitated, as if to ask permission in a home that was technically his. Nora sat on the porch step and patted the place beside her. "I know one," she said, "about a little weed that thought it was a flower." "Did it get picked?" June asked, startled. "Flowers get picked." "It learned where to grow," Nora answered, "where it could be seen the way it really was." They pressed against her as she spoke, the night cooling, the words braiding themselves around the four of them, with the gentle insistence of a prayer said not to be heard by heaven, but to be believed by the mouth that speaks it. When the girls were asleep, she closed her door, the sticky one Ethan had warned her about, and leaned her forehead against the cool wood. Her carpetbag sat at the foot of the bed like a witness that refused to leave. She could unpack tomorrow, she told herself, or the day after, or whenever the house decided she belonged to it as much as she wanted to belong. Across the hall, a floorboard murmured. Ethan's shadow moved in the crack beneath her door, paused, then faded. If he had raised a hand to knock, he lowered it again. Both of them grateful for a boundary neither wished to breach too soon. In the small hours, wind worried the eaves and the coyotes sang a thin, lonesome song. Nora listened and did not feel afraid. She had crossed a line drawn long ago by people who measured worth with a dull, cruel ruler. Out here the measurements were different. Miles ridden, fences mended, laughter coaxed from a room that had forgotten its shape. She slept. Dawn would come with chores and decisions and the bright, hard world of other people's opinions. It would also come with coffee, and small hands tugging at her skirt, and a man who understood the weight of silence and the grammar of decency. And it would come with Sunday, and the meeting Pastor Green had called, where a town would test its mercy and a cowboy would decide what kind of man he chose to be. Morning arrived with the kind of cold that clung even after the sun rose. The sky was pale blue, thin as glass, and the grass outside the Red River Ranch shimmered with frost. Nora woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. Ethan's boots heavy, the twins' bare feet skipping behind him. She dressed quickly. Her fingers stiff from the chill, the small room smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke. She pulled back the curtain and saw the land stretching in every direction. Rolling pasture, the glint of a river far off, the silhouettes of cattle moving slow and sure. It looked like freedom, but it also looked like loneliness. By the time she entered the kitchen, Ethan was already seated at the table, coffee steaming in his mug. The twins were buttering biscuits, their laughter a bright spark against the quiet. Nora hesitated in the doorway. "Morning," Ethan said without looking up. "Good morning," she replied softly. May waved a crumb-covered hand. "Daddy says we're going into town today." "Do we have to?" June groaned. "Miss Clara always smells like lemons and looks at me funny." Ethan's mouth twitched. "We need supplies, and I have a meeting with the stock agent. You'll both behave." June leaned toward Nora, whispering loudly enough for the world to hear. "You're coming too, right?" Nora hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was invited or expected to stay behind. Ethan looked up, his gray eyes steady. "Yes," he said finally. "You'll come along?" The road to town was rough and narrow. The girls' chatter filled the air. Stories about imaginary dragons, brave chickens, and a ghost that supposedly lived behind the barn. Ethan drove in silence, his hat low against the sun. Nora sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, unsure whether she should speak. Halfway to Silver Creek, a rider appeared on the ridge, a flash of brown coat and dust. The man lifted a hand in greeting, and Ethan slowed the wagon. It was Deputy Harris, his horse sweating, eyes sharp. "Mornin', Ethan, ma'am." He nodded to Nora with genuine respect. "You headed to town?" "Just for supplies," Ethan said. Harris's tone softened. "You might want to keep close. Pastor Green's been stirring talk since last Sunday, word spreading fast." Ethan's jaw tensed. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that starts with unmarried woman and ends with not proper." The twins quieted instantly. Nora's stomach turned cold. Harris tipped his hat. "I don't hold with gossip, but folks listen to the pastor more than they should. Thought you ought to know." Ethan nodded once, curt and controlled. "Appreciate the warning." As the deputy rode off, May leaned into Nora's arm. "Why would people talk bad about you? You didn't do anything." Nora forced a small smile. "Sometimes people just don't understand what they see." June frowned. "Then they need glasses." The simplicity of it made Nora laugh. Soft, almost fragile. Ethan glanced at her but said nothing. When they reached Silver Creek, the town was busier than before. Wagons rolled through the main street, men hauling feed sacks, women haggling at stalls. Yet as Nora stepped down, she felt the weight of eyes on her again. The same curious, measuring stares as at the train station. They went first to the blacksmith, then the feed store everywhere they walked. The murmurs followed. A group of women outside the church paused mid-conversation, eyes flicking from Ethan to Nora to the girls. One of them, broad-shouldered, with a lace bonnet too fine for this dusty place, was Clara Holt. She smiled sweetly when they passed. Mr. Cole, she drawled. Such a lovely day and such unusual company. Ethan gave a polite nod. Morning, Miss Holt. Clara's gaze shifted to Nora, traveling from her boots to the bun of her hair. So you're the one everyone's talking about. Silver Creek's newest mystery. Nora met her eyes. I didn't mean to cause a fuss. Clara's smile sharpened. Oh, it's not your doing, dear. Men get lonely. Children get attached. It's only natural. Before Ethan could speak, the twins each grabbed one of Nora's hands and tugged her away. We're going to the bakery, May announced. The bakery smelled of sugar and yeast. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Briggs, was older. Gray hair in a braid, eyes kind. Well, if it isn't the Cole girls, she said warmly. And who might this be? This is Nora, June said proudly. She lives with us now. Mrs. Briggs's eyebrows lifted, but not with judgment. Then she's a brave soul, she said. Those two can wear down a saint. Nora laughed, startled by the gentleness in the woman's voice. They bought bread and a small bag of cinnamon twists, and for a few minutes, the world outside didn't matter. When they returned to the wagon, Ethan was finishing his business near the post office. Clara was still across the street, pretending to examine bolts of fabric while watching them from the corner of her eye. As they rode home, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and rain. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Bruised and heavy, the twins fell asleep against Nora's sides, their small hands warm and trusting. Ethan spoke quietly, not looking at her. You don't have to listen to any of it, the gossip, the preacher. People talk because they don't know better. I've lived with talk my whole life, Nora said softly. It doesn't hurt any less just because it's familiar. He nodded once, a muscle flickering in his jaw. You've done nothing wrong here. I know. She hesitated, then added, but sometimes being different is enough. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The storm followed at a distance, grumbling over the plains. By late afternoon, the Red River Ranch glowed in a strange light, half dusk, half gold. Nora helped the twins down and carried the bread into the kitchen. Ethan went to the barn, and the rhythmic thud of his hammer echoed across the yard. Inside, the house was quiet. Nora stood by the window, watching the sky darken. The world felt vast, indifferent. Yet in that small kitchen, the warmth of the twins' laughter still lingered like the faint echo of music. When the door opened, she turned. Ethan stood there, hat in hand, shoulders streaked with dust. Storm's heading our way, he said. I'll need help with the cattle if it hits hard. I can help, Nora said without hesitation. He looked at her, measuring, perhaps remembering the woman who had arrived trembling and uncertain. Then he nodded. All right. Outside, thunder rumbled closer. The twins peeked from behind the doorway, wide-eyed but smiling. Can we watch? May asked. Inside, Ethan said firmly. Both of you. Nora touched the girl's hair, smoothing it back. Don't worry, we'll be back soon. As she stepped out into the wind, the first drops of rain struck her face, cold and sharp. She pulled her shawl tight, following Ethan toward the pasture. The storm was coming fast now, the sky rolling, dark as iron. She could smell the electricity in the air, feel it tremble through the ground. Ethan shouted something she couldn't hear over the wind, and together they ran toward the herd. The thunder cracked like a gunshot. Cattle bellowed, shifting nervously. Nora's heart pounded as she waded into the chaos, voice steady and calm. Easy! Easy now! Ethan turned, shouting over the storm. Stay close! She did. Rain lashed their faces, and lightning carved the sky open. The ranch seemed to breathe, alive, fierce, and full of danger. And somewhere inside her fear, a strange calm bloomed. She was part of this now, not a guest, not an intruder. Just someone fighting beside them to keep the world from breaking. The storm would rage through the night, and by dawn, everything in Silver Creek, hearts, fences, and old certainties, would look different. Rain hammered the land all through the night. The Red River Ranch groaned beneath the weight of it, shutters banging, wind howling through the cracks. The world outside washed into a single furious sound. By dawn, the storm was spent, leaving behind a bruised sky and puddles that mirrored the clouds. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke, heavy and clean. Nora stepped onto the porch, her dress still damp, her muscles aching from the night's labor. The fields were littered with broken branches and splintered fences, but the herd had survived. Ethan stood near the barn, hat low over his eyes, hands resting on his hips as he surveyed the damage. He turned when he saw her. "You shouldn't be up yet." "I've never been one to rest while there's work to do." A flicker, approval maybe, crossed his face. He nodded toward the yard. "I'll handle the fences. The girls will be hungry soon." She smiled faintly. "Then we both have our work cut out." Inside, the twins were stirring under their quilts. Their cheeks were flushed, hair tangled, but their laughter returned the moment Nora entered with the morning light. "Did we help last night?" May asked sleepily. "You helped by staying safe," Nora said, smoothing their blankets. "And you'll help more by eating every bite of breakfast." June giggled. "Even the porridge?" "Especially the porridge." By the time Ethan came in, the kitchen was warm and alive again. The smell of coffee filled the room, and the twins' chatter bounced off the walls like sunlight. He paused in the doorway, eyes sweeping over the neat table, the simmering pot, the woman moving quietly between stove and counter. Nora looked up. "Coffee's fresh." He accepted a mug. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said simply. That silenced him more than any protest could have. For a while, they ate in easy rhythm. The twins told wild tales about dragons made of thunder and cows that could talk if you listened hard enough. When they finally ran outside, chasing puddles, silence returned, comfortable but fragile. Ethan set his cup down. "You did good work last night." "So did you." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Most folks wouldn't have stood their ground in a storm like that, especially for someone else's kids." "They're not someone else's," Nora said before she could stop herself. Her voice softened. "Not really." Ethan's gaze met hers, steady, unreadable. For a long heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he rose, adjusting his hat. "The town will be talking." "They already were," she said. His jaw tightened. "Let them. They weren't here." He left before she could answer. Later that morning, she gathered the girls and headed into town. The wagon creaked along the muddy road, wheels cutting deep tracks through the softened earth. The storm had done its share of damage, trees down, rooftops torn. But the townsfolk were already out sweeping, patching, rebuilding. Life went on, but so did the whispers. As Nora stepped off the wagon near the general store, she felt the hush roll through the street. Conversations faltered. A few eyes darted away, pretending not to look. Others didn't bother hiding their judgment. Clara Holt stood outside her shop, arms folded, her pristine apron untouched by the storm. "Well, look who survived the tempest," she said sweetly. "You and Ethan make quite the team, don't you?" Nora kept her tone calm. "We took care of what needed doing." Clara's smile sharpened. "That's one way to put it. Folks say he risked his life for you." Folks like to say things. They do, Clara agreed. And when the pastor speaks this Sunday, they'll say a lot more. You might want to consider your position here, Mrs. She paused, savoring the word. Oh, right, Miss Bennett. Nora's throat tightened, but she refused to look away. Thank you for your concern, Miss Holt. Ethan's voice cut through the air behind her. That's enough, Clara. Clara's eyes widened just slightly, but she recovered fast. I only meant to offer advice, Ethan. A man with 2 young girls should be careful who he lets under his roof. He stepped closer, his tone calm but cold. My girls are fine, my house is fine, and anyone who says otherwise can come say it to my face. Clara's painted smile wavered. Of course, she said, retreating inside her store. The silence she left behind was heavier than any argument. Nora turned to Ethan, heart pounding. You didn't have to do that. Yeah, he said. I did. The twins came running from the bakery with sticky fingers and smiles. We got extra rolls, May shouted. Mrs. Briggs says they're for you, Nora. Nora accepted the small bag, her chest tightening. The old woman across the street waved kindly from her doorway. Not everyone judged. Some simply watched and understood. Ethan loaded the wagon, the muscles in his jaw still tense as they rode home. The air between them felt changed. Not softer, but clearer. Why did you stand up for me? Nora asked finally. He didn't look at her. Because it was the right thing to do. That's not usually reason enough for most people. I'm not most people. They fell silent again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. The storm had stripped the world bare, and in its wake, something steadier was taking root. As they neared the ranch, Ethan glanced at the horizon. Pastor Green's holding a meeting after church tomorrow, he said quietly. He'll have something to say. About me. About us. Nora nodded slowly. She wasn't sure whether to feel dread or defiance. Maybe both. When they reached the house, the twins jumped down and raced toward the barn. The sun broke through the clouds at last, turning the wet earth into a mirror of light. Nora looked toward Ethan. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. He tipped his hat slightly. Get some rest. You'll need it. As she stepped onto the porch, a breeze lifted her hair and carried the faint scent of rain and wild sage. The world was still uncertain, but for the first time since she'd arrived, Nora felt something close to belonging. Fragile, imperfect, but real tomorrow would test that feeling. And she was ready. Sunday morning broke clear and cool. The storm scrubbed from the sky as though the world had been given a clean slate. The church bell in Silver Creek rang across the plains, each note sharp and steady. Its echo carried all the way to the Red River Ranch, where Nora stood on the porch, watching dust rise from the road Ethan had hitched the wagon. The twins, dressed in their cleanest calico, chased each other in circles near the fence. There was laughter, sunlight, the smell of wild sage, but underneath it all was tension, the kind that came before a reckoning. Are you sure we should go? Nora asked quietly. Ethan adjusted his collar, eyes fixed on the distant steeple. We go every Sunday, and today's different. He met her gaze, calm but unwavering. That's exactly why we go. The town was alive with sound when they arrived. Boots on the boardwalk, horses snorting at the posts, children darting between skirts. Pastor Green stood outside the church door, greeting each family with a wide, rehearsed smile. He was a tall man, thin as a fence post, his black coat too fine for this dusty town. When he saw Ethan, His eyes flicked to Nora, then back. His smile didn't falter, but his voice turned formal. "Mr. Cole, Miss Bennett, so good to see you both this morning." "Morning, Pastor," Ethan said evenly. The pastor's gaze lingered on Nora for a moment too long. "I trust you're finding our community welcoming." Nora gave a polite nod. "Some more than others." A few heads turned. Whispers floated like the rustle of dry leaves. Ethan placed a gentle hand on May's shoulder and guided the twins forward. "Let's sit near the front," he said inside. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, scattering across pews filled with families. The hymns began. Low, familiar, steady. Nora's voice joined the others, trembling at first, then stronger. She focused on the words, not the eyes watching her from behind. But as Pastor Green took the pulpit, a hush settled over the room that wasn't reverent. It was expectant. "My friends," the pastor began, voice rising with practiced warmth. "We've survived a storm of wind and rain. But there are other storms too. The kind that test not our homes, but our hearts." The congregation shifted. Nora felt her pulse quicken. "It has come to my attention," Green continued, "that some among us have chosen to live in ways that invite confusion." His gaze swept the pews before stopping, predictably, on Nora. "We are all called to virtue, to decency, and when that virtue is tested, we must speak plainly." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan's hand tightened on the back of the pew. Clara Holt, seated 2 rows back, leaned toward her neighbor with a whisper that carried just enough to be heard. Ethan stood. The wood creaked under his boots. "You've said enough, Pastor." The man's eyebrows arched. "Mr. Cole, this isn't about you." "Yes, it is," Ethan interrupted, his voice low but steady. "It's about the kind of man you think I am, and the kind of woman you think she is." Gasps rippled through the room. "She came here with nothing," Ethan said. "My daughters chose her before I even spoke a word. And since that day, she's worked harder, cared deeper, and shown more grace than anyone who's ever darkened that door." He pointed toward the church entrance. Pastor Green cleared his throat, attempting composure. "Ethan, I mean no disrespect." "Then don't give it," Ethan snapped. The tension broke like glass whispers rose, harsh and hungry. The twins clung to Nora's skirt, wide-eyed. She could feel the heat rising to her face, shame battling gratitude. Then, from the back pew, Mrs. Briggs, the baker, stood up. "He's right," she said firmly. "That woman's got more heart than this whole room put together." A murmur spread. Uncertain but growing, Deputy Harris rose next. "I was out at the ranch the night of the storm. She worked through it same as Ethan. Saved 3 calves and 2 kids from freezing. I'd say that counts for something." The congregation's tide began to shift. Faces that had turned away days before now looked with curiosity. Some with guilt. Pastor Green, realizing he'd lost his hold, closed his Bible with a sharp thud. "Perhaps we'll end today's service early," he said tightly. As people filed out, Nora remained seated, heart pounding. The air inside the church felt too heavy to breathe. Ethan stood beside her, shoulders square, jaw set. When they stepped outside, Clara Holt waited near the door, lips thin. "That was quite the performance," she said. Ethan tipped his hat without a word and helped the twins into the wagon. Nora followed, her hands trembling as she gathered her skirts. Clara's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "You think standing up changes anything? People remember what they want to." Nora turned, meeting her gaze. "Maybe," she said quietly. "But sometimes they remember who stood up." The woman's expression faltered for the first time. As the wagon rolled away, the church bell began to ring again, slow, uncertain, as if unsure what it was marking, the end of service or the beginning of something new. The twins sat pressed close between them, humming the last hymn of the morning. The sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the fields. Nora looked at Ethan. "You shouldn't have done that for me." He kept his eyes on the road. "Didn't do it for you," he said. "Did it because I was tired of listening to lies." But the corner of his mouth lifted just barely. And in that small, unguarded moment, Nora realized something she hadn't before. Ethan wasn't just defending her name. He was protecting the fragile place she had begun to hold in his heart. Behind them, Silver Creek shimmered in the distance, still whispering, still watching. Ahead, the road stretched open, dusty, uncertain, and full of promise. And as the ranch came into view once more, the air felt lighter, charged with quiet change. Because the storm outside had passed, but another one, this time of hearts and choices, was only beginning. The days following the church incident were strangely quiet. The wind moved over the prairie with a softer rhythm, carrying away the sharpness of what had been said, but not the memory Nora felt it every time she stepped into town. Eyes lingering too long, voices dropping when she passed. Yet something else had changed, too. There were nods now, small ones from the people who had heard Ethan's words and found courage in them. Life on the Red River Ranch went on. Fences needed mending, the barn roof needed patching, the hens continued their daily squabbles. Routine had its mercy. It left little room for thinking one late afternoon. Nora stood in the yard hanging laundry. The sun stretched low, warm across her back, and the smell of clean cotton mingled with hay and dust. She caught sight of the twins running through the tall grass with a puppy they'd found by the creek, a thin, trembling thing with one floppy ear. "Look, Nora!" May cried, breathless. "He followed us home," June added. "He's hungry. Can we keep him, please?" Nora knelt, stroking the little creature's head. "He's skin and bones," she murmured. "When's the last time you ate, sweetheart?" The pup wagged its tail weakly, licking her wrist. Ethan appeared from behind the barn, a hammer still in his hand. "You two bringing home another mouth to feed?" The girls froze. "He's small," May said quickly. "He won't eat much." Ethan's mouth twitched. Not a smile exactly, but close. "All right," he said finally. "But he sleeps in the barn, and you'll both take turns feeding him." The girls cheered, hugging the dog. Nora looked at Ethan, warmth rising in her chest. "You're softer than you let on," she said quietly. "Don't spread that around," he replied. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not just gratitude, but recognition, the shared understanding of people who had carried too much loneliness for too long. That night, after the twins had fallen asleep with the puppy curled at their feet, Nora sat by the kitchen window mending one of Ethan's shirts, the silence of the house wrapped around her, broken only by the ticking clock and the faint creak of the windmill outside. She didn't notice Ethan enter until he was already standing near the doorway, the lamplight softening the lines of his face. "You should rest," he said. "I will. Just wanted to finish this one." He hesitated, then pulled out the chair across from her. "The girls like having you here." "They're good children. They've been happier," he said, voice low. "House feels different, quieter, but better." Nora paused, needle hovering in midair. "And you?" He met her eyes. "I'm still getting used to it." Her heart beat faster, though she tried to keep her tone steady. "To me being here?" "To not expecting the worst," he said. "That's a habit that's hard to break." For a moment, neither spoke. The lamplight flickered outside. A coyote called across the plains. Lonely, distant. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I heard from Harris this morning. Pastor Green's not done stirring trouble. Said he's planning to bring it before the town council." Nora's chest tightened. After everything he saw at the church? "Some men don't know how to stop once they start judging," Ethan said. "But Harris thinks he's pushing too hard. Might end up turning people against him." Nora folded the mended shirt neatly. "Let him talk. I can't change who I am." Ethan's expression softened. "No, and I wouldn't want you to." The words landed between them like a spark. She could feel the warmth of them long after silence returned. The next morning, the ranch stirred early. The twins were determined to name their new puppy, arguing over breakfast. "Rusty," said May, "because of his color." "River," June insisted, "because we found him by the water." Ethan sipped his coffee, amused. "Why not both? Rusty River." The girls laughed so hard milk spilled across the table. Nora shook her head, smiling. For a brief, shining moment, the house felt like what it might have always been. A home. But by noon, that peace cracked. A rider came galloping up the road, Deputy Harris, his horse kicking up dust. He dismounted fast, hat in hand. "Ethan," he said, voice grave, "there's trouble at the river crossing." "What kind?" "Wagon overturned a woman and her boy. They're trapped." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Nora, stay with the girls." "I can help," she said, already reaching for her shawl. He opened his mouth to object, then saw the resolve in her eyes. He nodded. "All right, let's move." The scene at the river was chaos. The wagon on its side, one wheel still spinning. The river had swollen from the recent storm. Current tearing at the wreckage, a woman's voice carried over the roar of water, desperate and raw. "Hold on, ma'am," Ethan shouted, wading in. Nora followed, skirts heavy, boots slipping in the mud. She saw the boy pinned beneath a broken board, water rising around his chest. "Ethan, here!" she cried. Together they heaved against the debris, their feet braced in the current. The wood gave way with a groan. Ethan pulled the boy free, cradling him against his chest. Nora grabbed the woman's arm, guiding her toward the shore. When it was done, when the boy coughed, sputtering but breathing, Nora sank to her knees in the mud, shaking. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" She nodded, tears mixing with rain and river water. "He's alive. That's all that matters." The woman sobbed, clutching her son. "You saved us," she whispered. Nora met Ethan's eyes, breathless. "No," she said softly. "We all did." That night, as the storm clouds drifted east and the rescued family slept safely in the barn loft, Ethan found Nora standing outside, staring at the horizon. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said quietly. "I'm not," she replied. "Not anymore." He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "You keep proving people wrong." "I stopped trying to prove anything," she said. "I just live." He nodded. "That's what makes them wrong." The moon rose above the plains, pale and full, casting silver light across the wet fields. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Nora didn't feel like a visitor or a burden. She felt like someone who had finally stepped into her own story, one that wasn't written by gossip or pity, but by courage, kindness, and quiet defiance. And as the wind moved through the grass, Ethan turned toward her, eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll take them back to town. Maybe folks will see the truth for themselves." Nora smiled faintly. "And if they don't, then they'll have to answer to me." The moment lingered, fragile, full, and unfinished, a promise of what might come next. Because by morning, word of what had happened at the river would spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. And with it, the story of a woman once called too wide to wed, now known for something far greater. Word of the rescue spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew how Ethan Cole and the woman from nowhere had dragged a boy from the river, how she'd stood waist-deep in the current until her legs gave out, refusing to leave until he breathed again at the Red River Ranch. Nora tried to ignore it. The rescued woman, Mrs. Jameson, and her son were resting in the spare room. The twins hovered around them, offering biscuits, asking endless questions. Ethan had gone into town early to fetch medicine and word from the doctor. Nora stood by the stove, hands trembling slightly as she poured tea. Her knuckles were bruised from the riverbank, a faint mark of last night's fight against the current. The house smelled of wet wool and soap, and for once, it felt less like a stranger's home and more like hers. When Ethan returned, his boots were heavy with mud, but his eyes carried something lighter. "Doctor says the boy'll be fine. Folks in town can't stop talking about what you did." She glanced up, startled. "What we did?" He shook his head. "No, Nora. They know it was you. Harris told everyone how you went in before I even got there." Her stomach tightened. "Let them talk. They'll find another rumor soon enough." "Maybe not this time," he said quietly. The twins ran in just then, breathless. "Miss Nora, Mrs. Briggs is here. She brought pies and said you're the bravest woman in Wyoming." Nora flushed, shaking her head. But when she stepped outside, there stood Mrs. Briggs, smiling warmly beside her wagon. "You saved that boy's life," she said. "People are seeing what kind of woman you are." Behind her, a few townsfolk lingered. Faces that had once turned away from Nora now nodded in shy respect. "Pastor Green won't like it," Mrs. Briggs added with a chuckle. "But maybe heaven's ears are open to someone else's prayers now." Nora laughed softly. It was the first time in weeks that laughter didn't feel out of place on her tongue. That evening, after Mrs. Jameson and her boy had gone home, the house felt strangely quiet again. The twins were asleep, and the puppy snored by the hearth. Nora stood outside watching the stars bleed into the horizon. Ethan joined her, the boards creaking under his boots. "Town's changing its tune," he said. "Harris said even Green didn't have much to say today." "Silence from a man like that is a miracle," she said dryly. He smiled, just barely, but it reached his eyes. "They're starting to see you the way the girls do." "And how's that?" "Like someone who belongs here." The words caught her off guard. She turned to look at him, the night air cool on her skin. "You think I do?" Ethan hesitated. "I think this place feels more like home when you're in it." Something fluttered in her chest. Hope, fragile and dangerous. That sounds like a confession. He looked down, thumb tracing the brim of his hat. Maybe it is. The wind shifted somewhere in the dark. A coyote called. Before Nora could answer, hoofbeats echoed from the distance. Fast, urgent. A rider approached, lantern swinging wildly. It was Deputy Harris. He reined in hard, dust scattering beneath his horse's hooves. "Ethan! Nora!" he called out. "You'd better come quick. There's trouble at the church." Ethan stiffened. "What kind of trouble?" "Pastor Green's holding a meeting. Says he's got witnesses. Claims Nora's not who she says she is." Nora's breath caught what? Harris dismounted, lowering his voice. "He's got papers from back east. Something about your past. Your husband. Debts, maybe more. He's using it to turn the town against you again." For a moment, the only sound was the wind. The fragile peace of the past few days shattered like thin glass. Ethan stepped forward, voice cold. "Where'd he get those papers?" "Doesn't matter," Harris said. "He's calling for a hearing at the council hall tomorrow evening. Says it's time Silver Creek protects its moral standing." Nora felt the world tilt beneath her. "I thought this was over," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "It's not over until we end it." Harris nodded grimly. "You'll need to be ready. Folks trust you now. But green's loud, and loud's dangerous in a crowd." Ethan turned to Nora, his eyes steady. "We'll face it together." She wanted to believe him, but fear had a way of reaching where courage couldn't. Still, when he reached out, just lightly, his hand brushing hers, she didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not asking what's true and what isn't." He shook his head. "I don't need to ask. I already know who you are." Harris looked between them, then nodded once and mounted his horse again. "Sunset tomorrow," he said before riding off into the dark. The sound of hooves faded, leaving only the whisper of wind through the grass. Nora stared toward the horizon, her heart heavy but resolved. She had run from her past once before, and it had chased her across miles of rail and dust to find her again. This time, she wouldn't run. Ethan stood beside her, silent but certain, the weight of tomorrow hanging between them, and under the endless Wyoming sky, as the lantern light flickered in the window behind them. Nora made a quiet promise. To herself, to the man beside her, and to the two little girls sleeping soundly inside. Whatever waited in that church tomorrow, she would face it. Not as the woman they whispered about, not as the stranger who didn't belong, but as Nora Bennett, strong, unbroken, and no longer afraid to stand in her own truth. The storm of words was coming, but she had weathered worse, and this time, she would not be washed away. The next day dawned overcast, as if the sky itself knew what awaited. A thin fog rolled over Silver Creek, veiling the town in pale gray. The church bell didn't ring that morning. The silence was heavier than its sound would have been. At Red River Ranch, Nora could hardly eat. Her hands shook as she buttoned her dress, the same one she'd worn on the train weeks ago. It was faded now, patched at the hem, but clean. She wanted to face whatever lay ahead with dignity. Ethan waited by the wagon. His face was unreadable, carved with the same stoicism she'd come to know. The twins hovered nearby, their small faces pale and uncertain. "Do you have to go, Miss Nora?" May asked, clutching her hand. "I do, sweetheart," Nora said softly, kneeling so their eyes met. "Sometimes we have to stand up, even when we're scared." June's lip trembled. "But what if they're mean again?" "Then I'll remember who I'm fighting for," Nora said, glancing at Ethan. "You too? And this family." Ethan helped her up. "You're not fighting alone." By the time they reached town, people were already gathering outside the meeting hall. Ranchers, shopkeepers, wives in Sunday dresses, men still dusted from the fields. The air buzzed with curiosity and quiet malice. Pastor Green stood at the steps, clutching a stack of papers like scripture. His black coat gleamed against the pale morning, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Clara Holt was beside him, lips pressed into a smug smile. As Nora stepped down from the wagon, the murmurs began. "That's her, the widow from back east. They say she left debts, or worse." Ethan's presence at her side quieted some of it. He guided her forward, every inch of him calm, solid, like an anchor against the tide. Inside, the room was packed. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of judgment. Nora's heart pounded as Pastor Green took his place at the front. Brothers and sisters, he began, his voice smooth and righteous. Our town thrives on decency and truth. We open our arms to newcomers, but only those who come with clean hearts and honest intentions. He turned, eyes landing on Nora. Miss Nora Bennett has not been truthful with us. I hold here, he raised the papers dramatically, a record from Missouri stating she left her husband's debts unpaid and fled the county after his death. There are even whispers her husband's passing was unnatural. Gasps rippled through the hall. Clara tilted her chin, savoring the moment Nora rose slowly. That's a lie, she said, her voice trembling but clear. My husband died of fever. I buried him myself. The debts he left behind were his business dealings, not mine. Green's smile was cold. Convenient, isn't it, when the only witness is the accused? The crowd murmured again, confusion, doubt, fear. Nora's vision blurred for a moment, but then Ethan stepped forward. You're done, Green, he said, voice low and firm. This isn't about truth. It's about pride. You can't stand that the people you thought beneath you found something you don't understand. Compassion. Careful, Mr. Cole, Green warned. Your reputation's tied to hers. One false move, and you drag your daughters down with you. Ethan's jaw tightened. My daughters already have a mother worth more than your sermons. The room fell silent. The twins, seated near Mrs. Briggs, clapped their hands together before anyone could stop them. That's our mama, May shouted. Laughter broke out, startled, nervous, but real. Even some of the men who'd been frowning began to smile. Green slammed his palm on the pulpit. This is no joke. Morality is not decided by children. Maybe not, Mrs. Briggs said, standing up. But kindness is, and I've seen more of that from this woman than from any of your sermons. Deputy Harris rose next. Pastor, that paper you're holding, I looked it over myself. There's no legal seal, no signature, just a copy of a record anyone could have written. Where'd you get it? Green hesitated. That's not the point. It is, Harris said, because from where I stand, it looks like slander, and Silver Creek's had enough of that. A murmur of agreement swept through the room. Green's face flushed crimson. You're all being blinded by pity, he spat. This woman is a fraud. Nora stepped forward, her voice steady now. No, Pastor, I'm a survivor, and that's something you'll never understand. She turned to the crowd, meeting their eyes one by one. Yes, I left Missouri. I had nothing but a ticket and a prayer. I didn't come here to find a husband or a handout. I came here to work, to live quietly, and maybe find a little peace. If that offends your sense of order, then I can't help you. The hall was silent. Outside, the wind stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of rain and earth through the open window. Then Mrs. Briggs began to clap. Slowly, firmly, the twins joined in. Deputy Harris followed. One by one, others rose. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to matter. Green stood frozen. Realizing he'd lost them, Ethan turned to him. You should leave, Pastor, before your words poison anyone else. The man glared at him, then at Nora. This isn't over, he hissed. But as he stormed out, Clara at his heels, it was over. The air felt lighter. The tension snapped like a string that had been stretched too long. Nora sank onto a bench, trembling. Ethan knelt beside her. You all right? She nodded, eyes wet but bright. I don't think I've ever been more so. Harris tipped his hat. You've got a place here now, ma'am. Don't let anyone tell you different. As the townsfolk began to leave, the twins rushed to her side, their small hands gripping hers. We told you, Miss Nora, June said, grinning through missing teeth. "You're our mama now." Nora's heart swelled. She looked toward Ethan, his steady presence, his quiet strength, and something deep inside her finally settled. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the street in golden streaks. Silver Creek, for once, felt like home. But not all storms end cleanly. As they left the hall, a shadow lingered in the alley. Pastor Green watching them with eyes that burned. The battle for Nora's place might have been won, but the war for peace had only just begun. The following days felt almost unreal. The town that had once whispered behind closed doors now greeted Nora with nods and warm smiles. Mrs. Briggs left fresh bread on the porch. The blacksmith tipped his hat when she passed by. Even Clara Holt, after a few days of silence, offered a stiff but civil greeting when they crossed paths at the general store. It should have been peace. But peace, Nora had learned, was fragile. And there was still something in the air that hadn't settled. Ethan noticed it too. He said little, but his eyes kept scanning the horizon, watchful and guarded. "Green's quiet," he said one evening, pouring coffee after supper. "Too quiet." Nora didn't answer right away. The twins were on the floor, playing with Rusty River. The puppy, whose tail now wagged like a metronome of joy, the warmth of the fire softened the room. And for the first time, the Red River Ranch felt completely alive. "He'll try again," Nora said finally, eyes on the flames. "Men like him always do. They think if they shout long enough, the world will sound like their voice." Ethan nodded. Let him shout. The town's made up its mind. She wanted to believe him, but that night, she dreamt of the river. Not the calm, silver one outside town, but the one from her past. The muddy flood that had taken her husband. The shouting men. The papers she'd been forced to sign, and the shame that followed her like a shadow across state lines. When she woke, the dawn light spilled pale and cold through the window. Ethan was already outside, mending the corral fence. She watched him from the porch, his movements steady, precise. A man who fixed things, and not just wood and nails. She made coffee, stepped outside, and handed him a cup. "You ever get tired of fixing everything?" she asked. He took a sip, smiling faintly. "No one else is going to do it." Nora looked at the open land, endless and wild, like a promise that refused to break. "Maybe some things don't need fixing," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her, but before he could answer, the sound of hooves broke the calm. A rider approached fast, dust trailing behind him. Deputy Harris. He dismounted near the gate, urgency written all over his face. "Ethan, Nora? We've got a problem. Pastor Green didn't leave town after all. He's been meeting folks at the old mill by the creek, talking about starting his own congregation." Ethan frowned. "Let him start a church if he wants." Harris hesitated. "That's not all. He's been telling people the council was wrong. That you, Ethan, bribed them to protect Nora. He's saying he's got proof." Nora felt the chill run down her spine. "Proof? Of what?" "Letters," Harris said. "Supposedly written by you, confessing you ran off with another man's money before coming here." Ethan's expression darkened. "That's a lie." "Of course it is," Harris said quickly. "But Green's good at making lies sound holy. He's holding another meeting tonight. Says it's about cleansing the town's conscience." Ethan slammed his hat down. "He's not getting away with that." "I'll be there," Harris said. "But you should come too, both of you. If you don't show, it'll look like you've got something to hide." Nora met Ethan's gaze. "We'll go." By sunset, The old mill was crowded. Lanterns swung from the rafters, throwing jagged shadows on the walls. The air was thick with tension and sawdust. Pastor Green stood near the front, papers in hand, his voice rising like thunder in the close space. "Silver Creek has been led astray," he declared. "We've welcomed sin into our midst and called it mercy, but mercy without truth is corruption." The crowd murmured, uneasy but listening. Then he held up a bundle of yellowed pages. "Here is her confession. Nora Bennett, the so-called widow, the liar who deceived us all." A wave of shock swept through the room. Nora's heart pounded. Ethan's hand went instinctively to her back, steadying her. "That's enough," he said, voice sharp as steel. "If you've got words to throw them at me." Green sneered. "I'd expect no less from a man bewitched by sin. You've risked your daughter's souls for a woman like her." The twins, seated near Mrs. Briggs, gasped quietly. Nora stepped forward before Ethan could. Her voice was low but fierce. "Those letters are forged," she said, "and you know it." Green turned, holding one page high. "Then explain this. Your signature, your handwriting." "I can explain it," came another voice. Every head turned. Mrs. Jameson, the woman Nora had rescued from the river, stepped through the crowd. Her hair was tied back, her dress still worn but neat. "I used to work at the courthouse in Missouri," she said clearly. "I saw your name on documents just like these. After you left, they were copied by the same man who owed your husband money. He tried to shift the debt onto you after he died." Gasps rippled through the crowd again. This time not against Nora, but for her Green's face went pale. "You lie." "No," Mrs. Jameson said. "I kept one of the real records, the one with the official seal. I can show the difference." She held out a folded document, trembling slightly. "You doctored these, Pastor." Ethan stepped closer, voice calm but dangerous. "You went too far, Green." The pastor's composure cracked. "You think this town belongs to you now? You think you can waltz in, save a boy, and fool God himself?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "No one's trying to fool God. Just stop you from pretending to be him." Green's fury flared. "You'll regret this, both of you." He threw the papers aside and stormed out, his followers scattering in confusion. As the crowd broke apart, Mrs. Briggs placed a hand on Nora's arm. "You don't owe this town another word. They know the truth now." Nora exhaled shakily, the weight lifting from her chest. Ethan turned to her, eyes softening. "It's over," he said quietly. "Is it?" she asked. He nodded. "For him it is." But as they left the mill, the prairie wind carried the faint sound of hoofbeats retreating fast into the night, and the uneasy feeling that not all ghosts go quietly. Still, under the rising moon, with Ethan's arm brushing hers and the twins waiting at the wagon, Nora felt something close to peace. She'd stood her ground, faced her past, and found her voice again. And though one storm had ended, she sensed another on the horizon, one that wouldn't destroy, but change everything. Tomorrow, she knew, nothing would ever be the same again. The sun rose bright and gold over Silver Creek, washing away the remnants of the storm that had once divided the town. The air was still cool, carrying the scent of sage and morning dew for the first time in a long while. Peace didn't feel fragile. It felt earned. Nora stood on the porch of Red River Ranch, watching the land stretch out before her. The fences Ethan had mended stood straight. The herd grazed quietly, and the twins' laughter carried through the yard as they chased Rusty River in wide, clumsy circles. She breathed in deeply, the wind tugging softly at her hair. It no longer felt like borrowed air. Ethan came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, dust smudging his forearms, the kind of worn strength that belonged to a man who'd stopped running from his own grief. He caught her watching him and smiled faintly. "Coffee's ready," she said, holding out a cup. He took it, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, familiar. "Town's quiet," he said. "Harris says Green's gone, packed up in the night and rode east. Clara's taken over the church meetings for now." Nora looked out at the horizon, where the faint dust trail of the old road shimmered. "He'll find another place to preach," she murmured. "Some people need their anger more than they need forgiveness." Ethan nodded. "Maybe, but he won't bother us again." For a long time they stood side by side, the morning unfolding around them. The twins burst through the door then, cheeks flushed and dresses grass-stained. "Daddy!" May cried, holding up a fistful of wildflowers. "We picked these for Miss Nora!" June grinned. "She's not Miss Nora anymore. She's Mama Nora. Right, Daddy?" Ethan froze mid-sip. Nora blinked, her heart stumbling in her chest. The girls looked between them expectantly. Rusty River barked, tail wagging, as if to agree. Ethan set down his cup. "You two run along and feed the chickens," he said softly. They pouted but obeyed. Disappearing toward the barn, Nora turned to him, trying to find her breath. "You didn't have to," he interrupted gently. "They're not wrong." Nora's lips parted, but no words came. Ethan stepped closer. "You came here with nothing but a carpet bag and a heart big enough to take in 2 wild girls and a broken man. You gave this place life again." "Ethan," he took her hand. "I've spent years thinking I wasn't meant to love again, but you changed that." His thumb brushed the edge of her palm. "You changed everything." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of release, the kind that comes after holding your breath for too long. "I didn't plan on any of this," she whispered. He smiled. "Good things rarely are." For a moment, neither spoke. The world around them was quiet except for the rustle of grass and the distant call of a meadowlark. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn silver band. "It was my mother's," he said. "I was saving it for when I found someone worth asking twice." Her laugh trembled through the tears, and the first time, "I got it wrong," he said simply. "I don't plan to again." He dropped to one knee. "Nora Bennett, will you stay? Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you finally found where you belong." Her voice broke. "Yes, Ethan, 1,000 times yes." The wedding took place 2 weeks later, under the oak tree behind the house. The whole town came. Mrs. Briggs brought pies. Harris polished his badge. Even Clara Holt attended, standing at the edge of the crowd with a small, sheepish smile. The twins were flower girls, scattering petals in uneven handfuls, and Rusty River wore a ribbon around his neck when Nora walked down the short aisle in her simple blue dress. The whispers that once followed her turned into cheers. Pastor Green was gone, but the new preacher, a young man with kind eyes, spoke gently. "Love doesn't erase the past. It redeems it." When Ethan and Nora exchanged vows, the sky opened wide and bright above them that evening, after the guests had gone, and the lanterns glowed soft across the porch. Nora sat with Ethan watching the twins chase fireflies. The air was filled with laughter and the hum of crickets. "Do you ever think," she said quietly, "how strange it is that pain can lead you home?" Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's just the people who don't give up on you. Nora leaned her head against him, smiling through the tears she didn't bother to hide. Then I guess I'm home. The twins' laughter drifted through the dark, and Rusty River barked at the stars. The world that had once judged her had changed, not because she begged for acceptance, but because she had lived long enough and bravely enough to deserve it. As the moon rose over the plains, Nora looked at the man beside her, the girls chasing light, and the ranch she now called her own. She thought of all the names they had called her. Too wide, too strange, too much. And then she smiled. Because here, in this wide country of dust and sky, she had learned something Pastor Green never could. That love, when it's true, never measures worth. It simply sees it and keeps it forever. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories, leave a like, and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.